Hello again and welcome back. We have another listener question. Here we go. Hey, my partner and I love your tips. Well, thank you so much. I'm hoping I can pick your brain, pick away, better than picking my nose. We are already using some of your tips as only found your pages recently. I hope they're effective. Our youngest is, you wrote server, I'm assuming severe, autistic with a load of other issues, and his teacher almost every day will call asking me or partner to collect him as he is upset and can't be settled or just dysregulated. We even have to change it so his behavior therapist and other therapists go to class to help her, but she is still sending him home. What do I do? Interesting. So I'm glad to read, I should say. We have even changed it so his behavior therapist or other therapists go to class to help her. It sounds like, sorry, I got a notification on Facebook. Apparently, my notifications make sounds now. I'm glad to hear that they are willing to cooperate and accept the help of a behavior therapist and other therapists going to class to help. Okay. Um, so I suppose you're saying, what do I do? So I would ask a couple questions. What is your impression of your child's needs at the time that you pick them up or at the time that you are um, being called? So every incident that happens like this, and apparently this is controversial, but this is just the law. It should be documented and data should be gathered. There's no way to prevent further behaviors without having data that articulates ABCs, basically before, during, and after. What was the sensory environment? What was, what caused the event? That way they can identify triggers for behavior and they can adjust, remove, or teach desensitization for whatever it is that is upsetting your child and dysregulating them. So that is what I would be interested in. Secondly, I assume that you are requesting and have access to that data. If you don't, then sure, there's nothing you can do without that data. You are legally entitled to that data. Number two, number three, I don't even know how far I am right now. Make sure that each phone call home of being picked up from school is being recorded as a suspension. Technically, when the school is requesting that you pick up your child, it is a suspension. If they're just suggesting it and then you voluntarily go pick up your child, that's a voluntary parent pickup that doesn't need to be documented as anything legally. So, a voluntary parent pickup doesn't accrue anything, but, well, I shouldn't say that. It can be accrued as, what's that term when truancy. So it could be held against you legally later to say that you were not a responsible parent and you kept your child out of school. If it is documented as as a suspension, then it's really hard to say, as a suspension. If it's documented appropriately as a suspension, then it's in most states, in every state that I know of. But again, I've been getting feedback that you can't just generalize those numbers. So I will continue to do my best for free and tell you that in most states, it's 10 suspensions. And then they have to hold what's called a manifestation meeting. Yes. I was thinking manifest destiny. My goodness. A manifestation meeting to determine, are these behaviors all coming from the disability? Those kinds of behaviors that come from having a disability, meaning if they didn't have the disability, these behaviors probably wouldn't be occurring. Those are called maladaptive behaviors. Maladaptive. So if you say, a lot of times schools can get out of having to have legally those manifestation meetings if they're not documenting each call home and each parent pickup as a suspension. If they don't get all the way to 10, they never have to have that manifestation meeting to determine, are these maladaptive behaviors because of the child's disability, or are these just, bad days and bad choices, and they're in full control. They're just choosing to make bad choices. When it's determined that it's maladaptive behaviors, then there's a whole different protocol as far as um, making sure that you are adjusting the behavior intervention plan. That's the BIP, making sure that the accommodations are appropriate. There's a whole, maybe the placement is not appropriate. You would maybe reevaluate the LRE, which is the least restrictive environment. They want, and that's a legal term, they want each child to be in their least restrictive environment. In other words, it's a balance of having their needs met, but also that they have the opportunity to do and learn as much as they can independently. So the environment with least restrictions, maybe this would need to be reevaluated. Maybe it needs to be a private placement, meaning a private school that has more resources that can meet your child's needs, for example. Either way, the other thing that I would first make sure is that your child has had a functional behavioral assessment, or FBA. I talked about this on my social media, which creates a behavior intervention plan. And there are, differing by states, a legal amount of time that's required for them to fulfill the behavior intervention plan. Once you have requested and had that functional behavioral assessment and signed off on the plan to fulfill the functional behavioral assessment. That's a lot of words. FBA, BIP. Again, I have some social media. It sounds like you follow me on TikTok. I do have some breakdowns of those procedures and what to do and those terminologies if you need to revisit them. The reason that you would want to have a functional behavioral assessment and a behavior intervention plan is that that's really the next step. When an IEP or 504 is not enough and behaviors are still a big struggle, then a behavior intervention plan is the next step. It's still a legally binding document. Some schools incorporate it into the IEP, meaning it's legally binding because it's part of the IEP. Some schools and states, it's a separate document, but still legally binding. And with all the data that is documented about your child in the functional behavioral assessment, you would take that data and turn it into the behavior intervention plan. So all the data and evidence that had been gathered turns into the behavior intervention plan, and it would articulate some of the sensory struggles and triggers that your child has. Is averse to bright lights. Behavior intervention plan, should include sunglasses at all times or accessible at all times. Is sensitive to loud sounds. Behavior intervention plan includes that they will have access to their ear defenders at all times, and they will be warned verbally of any loud sounds 4 seconds, 5 seconds before loud sound happens. They will be pre-warned about fire drills. They will be, those kinds of things. They have a personal space bubble of 4 feet. They are very averse to physical touch. Avoid physical touch at all costs. No touching of the shoulders. No hand over hand kind of instruction. Any of those things that the data shows leads to an event is what determines the behavior intervention plan. So you absolutely have to be getting that documentation and data. A lot of times getting the documentation and data, just make sure that the teacher is having the documentation or data. If they tell you or communicate in some way, I don't have time for that documentation or data, that's something else to document, right? You take that evidence, and hopefully it was written down, and you say, this teacher does not have the appropriate resources or personnel if they're unable to take documentation or data as is legally obligated to create their progress reports, to determine accommodations, to determine anything that has to do with their education. It all has to be evidence based. So if there is no evidence, you cannot be making decisions educationally on my child's behalf. I hope that was helpful. Your behavior therapists and other therapists who are now going to class can absolutely, and I would advocate hard for them to be part of that functional behavioral assessment. IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is a federal law that a lot of special education law is pulled from per state, like how it's enacted, says that there's no specific these people should be a part of the functional behavioral assessment team, and these people should not or are excluded. So you can advocate for anyone with good credentials, appropriate credentials, who has experience with your child. So, in other words, your behavior therapist and other therapists would be fantastic resources for that functional behavioral assessment. I would advocate hard for them to be part of the team. And again, I would encourage you, I don't know if this is how you have been communicating or not to your team. I would encourage you to be a little more assertive. You never have to be rude. Some people, as you've probably seen on my TikTok, will interpret that as condescending or demanding. We are setting expectations. Without set expectations, though, then there's no, what's the word? There's no, not liability, there's no accountability. So we have to use specific legal verbiage, set beginning dates, so there are appropriate due dates, research for your state what the amount of days are. You could even ask in the IEP meeting. I would assume they might tell you they don't know. In that case, I would ask the supervisor. If it seems like an unreasonable amount of days, I would honestly do the research yourself in case they may be misinformed. Wink, wink. I hope that's helpful. That was a lot of information. Again, a lot of this information can be found either on other of my social media or in some of my previous podcasts. I'm rooting for you and your child. I hope we can make the public education system a more inclusive environment. Best of luck to you. See you next time.